Good morning. Welcome to Books at the Bottom of the Stairs. My name is Lorraine, and happy anniversary to me. Happy anniversary to me. Happy anniversary to Books at the Bottom of the Stairs. Happy anniversary to me. We are celebrating 5 years on YouTube, BookTube, whatever you want to call it, and I am just so excited. I didn't expect to last 5 years. I didn't expect to get past 25 viewers. I mean, that was my dream 5 years ago, was to get 25 viewers and one view a week. And I assumed that that would be my best friend or my husband who were going to be doing the viewing. So I've exceeded those expectations by like billions. I think there's over 700 viewers right now, and I probably get about an average of 10% of viewing each video. So that's really cool. And I'm very happy by this whole thing. So what I decided to do today was to bring to you my top 5 out of 5 reads for the last 5 years and share them. They've all been spoken about in the past, but I decided to consolidate. Now, I was just sort of looking over the list and pondering it a little bit. Oh, and by the way, this is my tiara. I got it for my 50th birthday, and I have been wearing it ever since. So that's 16 years of tiara time. And I loan it out to friends who are having significant events in their lives, but just don't want to spend money on a tiara. And I don't understand that. I think every person should, if at the least, have some kind of bling, like a rhinestone brooch, at the very least. Anyhow, tiara talked about blah, blah, blah. Oh, so one of the things I noticed going through my 5 out of 5s for the last 5 years is that my 3 favorite authors did not make it. They've had 4 out of 5s and 4s, but so that would be Thomas King and Helen Humphreys and Richard Wagamasi. And now Richard Wagamasi is no longer writing because he's dead. And so I've read everything that can be read. Helen Humphreys did put out 2 books in the last 5 years that it came to about 4.5 for me, and that doesn't mean I don't love them, but they just weren't quite 100%. And Thomas King, I think, trying to remember what he put out in the last 5 years, I think it was Indian on Vacation. I think it was Indian on Vacation, and that was okay. That was not his best book. Now, if you were to ask me across my entire life of reading, then we'd be having a different conversation. But just in terms of the last 5 years. So what's interesting also to me is I broke it down into categories just because I did actually have more than 10 5 out of 5s. I had classics as well, and I had young adult, and I had middle grade. But I thought I'll just stick to adult fiction for this. Classics are classics, and I don't think I'm going to be bringing anything new to the lists that you haven't seen elsewhere. Maybe, but no, I don't think I've got anything new there. And then in terms of young adult, it's just been kind of a slowly diminishing set of returns. I have not loved the last 2 or 3 years of what's available in young adults. So I would say that most of what I like in young adults is, there were about 4, and 2 of them were classics. So yeah, it's a bit of a dry spot right now. Middle grade, I could just go on, and maybe I will one day. But anyhow, I decided that out of all of those categories, contemporary-ish literature was where we would go to today. So starting off the list is, okay, and technically my dream, I don't know if it's going to happen, my dream is to put a little picture on the side here because I don't have any of these books in my possession because I use the library a lot. Okay, starting off the list is A Bird in the House by Margaret Laurence. She's a Canadian author, and this is a classic. It's, I think, about 10 short stories that are all linked by the main character, a young girl living in the town of Maniwaki, I guess. What was her name? I was just looking it up. I'm so bad. I think I'm prepared. I'm not prepared. Let me see if I can get her name. Narrator Vanessa McLeod. Yes, 8 interconnected short stories, and Maniwaki, Manitoba, and it takes the character from about age 10 to early adult years. And why did I like it? Well, first of all, no real harm was done. That was nice. It seems to be a season for reading books where no real harm is done. It's beautifully written. Margaret Laurence is an incredible author. She has got beautiful sentence structure and thought process and organization and imagery, and her characters really come to life in those structural craftsmanship of writing. I think she's one of the Canadian writers who best demonstrates the craft of writing. There are a lot at her time. There were a lot of male authors who were getting all the hero awards, but I think she really stands above many of them. Okay, the next one, and I guess that's a classic too. When was it printed? I guess in the 40s. So it qualifies as a Canadian classic and just darn good on its own. Now, the rest, there is in no particular order, I should say. They're just as I found them. So the earlier they are on the list, probably the earlier I read them, 5 years ago. The next one is Five Little Indians by Michelle Good. Now, that got a lot of support when it first came out. It's about several children who have been released from residential schools out on the West Coast and have been, through the residential school system, pretty much set up for failure once they have aged out. And they all end up in, oh my goodness, I think it's Victoria, but I could be wrong on that. It's probably Vancouver. Anyhow, they just succeed on their own. I found it an uplifting book. It was terrible situation. Each one of those children, as they became adults, was just so foredoomed, and the possibilities of them succeeding in terms of the white man's culture was pretty close to zero. But they all ended up in this pretty down and out neighborhood. But within this community, I think each one of them did quite well considering. I think that each one of them in their own way really held true to their inner spirit, to their inner core, to their inner values. And the shit just didn't happen. It didn't stop happening. They just continued to be up against, barrier after barrier after barrier. But a lot of people found that a very despair-filled book. But I just felt that the characters really remained consistently true to themselves. And that's where I got my hope from, was that they didn't all just melt into the pavement. So I don't know if that's a very good description of a book, really. It doesn't sound like something I'd want to pick up going into it. But I found it was just a beautiful book. Okay, one that actually is really on the cusp of young adult, but I found it really hilarious, was Minor Mage by T. Kingfisher. And T. Kingfisher has got this capacity to write for young children right on up into adults. And this one, I think, sits on that shelf between young adult and adult. And we have got a father and son team wizard, and I think everybody wishes that the kid was going to be a wizard, but he's so inept. And what happens in this particular world is that in order to be a tourist and in order to travel, you have to have a guide, and the guide needs to be a wizard. And Dad is getting less and less competent as the years go by, and the son is probably never going to have aptitude. So this one tour group just ends up with this combo, and their travels through wherever they're going. The young son just develops from being a disaster to the only solution that the world knows. And it's, what would it be? It's sort of coming into your own skill set and developing confidence, but I read it as a comedy. I've read it a couple of times, and I think it's a fabulous commentary on how our expectations of the world and other people and are founded on such flimsy evidence, and then how people rise or fail to rise to what's expected of them, and the results are not necessarily a disaster. So yeah, I just truly enjoyed that one. Minor Mage. Okay. A Grandmother Begins the Story by Michelle Porter. That one I've just recently finished. You may have seen the videos recently. We've got 3.5, I say, because the youngest person is still fairly young in the story, but we've got 3 generations of moms. This is a First Nations author and First Nations group of characters. And we do start with the grandmother who's starting to tell the story of how her life was impacted by contact with white people and how the generational trauma. There's a ghost in there. There's a talking buffalo, amongst a herd of buffalo. There's this younger character who's trying to figure out what she's going to do in the face of her grandmothers and great-grandmothers and mothers, and possibly an aunt, sort of failure to cope well in the world of this constant crossover between a white culture and a First Nations culture. And again, like similar to Five Little Indians, there's just so many walls that you come banging up against that it's very hard for an individual to figure out where are you going to be yourself in the face of these external elements. And so there's some very interesting resolutions to each character's core dilemma, and then whether the family comes together. It's pretty separated through anxiety and anger and disappointment, and yet there is this drive to not lose that connection. But what's it going to look like? Because everybody's so damaged. So it sure doesn't look like a Hallmark family movie, you know? It's a very rough reconciliation in a way, but it's actually pretty joyful. I found it to be quite joyful. Another book that I really enjoyed was Anxious People by Backman. What's his first name, Fredrik? I've got another one sitting here. This one was a surprise to me. I know he's got the series that a lot of people really have enjoyed. Now, I don't particularly love hockey, and so I couldn't quite get into that series. But this is about a group of people that have been captured, held hostage by someone who has a gun, who doesn't know what to do with the gun, who doesn't know what to do with the group of hostages, and how are they going to get out of this? And as they're in the hostage-taking situation, they get to know each other and find that they're actually really sympathetic to each other. And, you know, I don't want to give it away because there isn't a huge plot line, but it's about people under adverse situations coming to an understanding of how they arrived there and what are they going to do with it. And is there a way that we can support each other in this insane dilemma that they all find themselves in. Again, I felt that it was a book that ended with hope, which is, I guess, a theme here. Is it a little bit of a contrived ending? Yeah, a little bit. But I, again, didn't find that awful. I found it plausible. So I think that's another element of all of these books, is where you're set up with some kind of dilemmas and crises, but the ending, the author has come to a plausible scenario. And that I enjoy, because I was reading a book the other day where I thought, it was okay until the ending, where it just, everything had to be wrapped up in such a way that every character would be happy in some sort of fashion, and thought, I don't know. Which one was it? Oh, it's a book I just was reading in like 3 minutes ago, and Oh, Goodnight, Mr. Tom. Yeah, that should be in this list too. I'll get to that in a sec. Okay, Rabbit Foot Bill. Okay, that is by Helen Humphreys. That makes me a liar. I was a liar in the beginning of the video. Rabbit Foot Bill was a really interesting book for me. Canadian author Helen Humphreys got me into so much trouble with my book club. I think I over-identified with this book. We've got a story where there's a young male protagonist, encounters someone who has become a hermit, and the person who's a hermit has chosen this, that hasn't been forced upon them. They have decided to withdraw from society because their trauma has been so deeply embedded that they just don't have that functionality anymore. And so the young boy and this hermit type individual connect in a way, but of course there's a misalignment. The boy thinks one thing is happening, and the Rabbitfoot Bill sees something else. Well, also has life experience and maturity. Just because they've withdrawn from society doesn't mean that they aren't smart and they don't have wisdom. So a crisis arises, and it's a sad, tragic crises, and the young boy kind of blanks it out and goes on with his life, and enters into a situation with, they've decided to pursue a medical career in psychiatry, and gets to the psychiatric hospital, and there is the problem of being able to keep this wall between you and your patients. And so some of this childhood trauma finally arises, and we start to see this psychiatrist doctor as a man dealing with things. Well, that's where I got a little over-invested. and some of the people in my book club felt that it was just not possible. Someone who was a professional just would not behave that way. And I thought, why not? There are a lot of very competent people who crash and burn. And so, yes, it became quite a heated conversation, and we don't want to think about that. But as a book, it is definitely lots and lots to talk about. I think it makes an excellent book club book, and also meets the bill of being Canadian, which I always enjoy. Okay, the second last one I've got here is Homecoming by, I meant to look that up, because I remembered her first name. I remember her last name, but I don't necessarily remember how to pronounce it. So, pause. So, Homecoming by, it's right in front of me. There it is. Yaa Gyasi. So that's spelled Y-A-A and then G-Y-A-S-I. And I found this fascinating because it's a story of two sisters and the generations that follow, but also it takes place in Ghana, in Africa, and southern United States. So we've got these two sisters separated through the slave trade. One manages to stay in place in Ghana as the mistress of a British officer, and their resulting family line. The other girl is sent across on a slave ship and lands in southern US, and her family as it goes down the generations as well. And we see not only the sort of development of their lives, but we also see the countries as they're responding to the slave trade, the not slave trade, and just the sort of upheaval that happens politically and socially from those kind of like significant changes to human life and economies. So so that was all part of what was really interesting that's happening. That's the noise in the background. But what was really interesting was just the way these women's families managed to somehow stay intact despite the, I mean, yes, there was an ocean between them and they didn't get to cross over, but they were in their lines able to stay intact, and we were able to see this kind of history evolving. And oh my goodness, the writing was so good. She was very descriptive, very much understood the difference between the geography of the two countries and the cultural economies of the two countries, and how the characters reacted within this, and what were their crises points in terms of what, you know, external crises points, but also how they stood up to it. How, you know, again, once again, it's the description of how the individual manages to stay intact in the face of these problems, or fractures and comes back together. So again, I didn't love the ending, but it made sense. And I think as someone who is an unsuccessful writer, I certainly couldn't have done better. I think that it was just beautifully written all together, and yeah, I would. Now, I did not love her next book. I will just say that the next book has animal cruelty in it, and I couldn't get past that. The first time I encountered it, it was trouble. And I understand it's a beautiful book, but, sorry, I couldn't. So I was just talking about Goodnight, Mr. Tom, which is a 5 out of 5 for me in terms of the book itself and the movie. But reading it the second time and remembering the movie, I realized that I had a huge burst of sentimental nostalgia the first time I read this. I think that's okay. I don't do it very often, but this book was really great until a certain point. There's a death that happens, and it's as if the author felt sorry for the character and needed to patch up all the problems. This is taking place in World War II, and we've got this young boy, Will, who has been sent out as an evacuee child and meets Mr. Tom. Mr. Tom is an elderly man in his 60s, and because in those days that was elderly, and not interested in children. He himself has lost his wife and a baby at birth, and so he's just never come out of his grief. So he's encountering this poor, wretched kid, and pity takes over and love develops. The kid, as I said, it was a mess. Like how he even survived the train ride, I don't know. But gets to Mr. Tom's and starts the process of physically healing, emotionally not so much, but intellectually. So like there's moments where this kid is starting to become himself. And I liked what was going on, but just knowing how things went during that period of war and what was happening with the evacuee children and so forth, it just started to get a little too solved. Pretty much everybody who had a problem in the middle of the book had an okay to a happy ending by the end of the book. And I didn't notice that the first time. And the movie was done in such a way that, it was a kind of movie where you're supposed to be really emotionally connected to the story. And that happened. But so at the time, I didn't notice that everybody got their happy ending. I think a little bit of cliffhanging kind of moments could have taken place there because it wasn't all resolved. These are just early days in the war, so I would have liked to have seen some open-endedness. But it's still a 5 out of 5 for me. So I don't know how many books that was. I think that's 9, close to 10 books. And I'm going to go and spend probably hours trying to put the little images up here. If I don't, there will certainly be information in the doobly-doo below, but let's hope for both. Am I going to, you know what? I'm not going to do the other 5 out of 5s unless you ask for them, because as I say, I think there's, in classics, I don't have a ton of new stuff, maybe 2 books that you might not have come across, and the middle grades I can go on forever. So that's a long list. And I don't know, so I have occasionally wondered whether my 5 out of 5 for middle grades is because the book is excellent or because I'm so relieved to read a book that is well constructed. I'm not sure what my discernment process is for that. So if you've been with me for all these 5 years, thank you so much for, enjoying the sled ride. It has been great fun, and I'm very grateful to you all. And I'm certainly grateful to all the newcomers. Thank you so much for joining. And I hope you continue to enjoy these videos. I'll see you next week with something else. I hope all your reading dreams and adventures continue to come true. Bye-bye for now.